نحن أصحاب المعاني لسنا أصحاب الألفاظ. الألفاظ الجوفاء لا تجدي. انظر إلى المعنى.
So the aim was to help you to understand, inshallah, like to get a platform for tomorrow's discussion. Any questions?
Can you please repeat the 3 ways that Islam is attacked? If you're mentioning the first one is they deny the ahadith and the attributes of Allah.
Yeah.
And this is more harmful than the kuffar. I didn't get the other 2.
Okay, right. The question, the quotation from, I don't have the full quotation from Ibn, where is it gone? Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi. I only have that part. I only have that part of the statement, but I can get you that. I'll get you that, inshallah ta'ala. Anything else?
There are some people in like higher institutions like universities, professors who say that with Salafiyyah, it limits intellectualism and it causes intellectual stagnation in the Muslim community.
Right.
So how do we respond to it? Especially they say in the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the Muslim community was just budding to become intellectualized and had that, but these orthodox scholars just stamped all that out.
The question of the brother was, how do we respond to some of these professors in universities who say that in the time of Imam Ahmad, the Muslim Ummah was waiting to become intellectually advanced, but then when these Imams of the Sunnah came along, they put an end to that intellectual, that so-called intellectual advancement. Okay, so how do we respond to these people? To be honest with you, the answer is a bit lengthy in detail, but in principle, we understand that these people, in fact, this will be tomorrow's lesson as well. These professors, these people who look at Islam and study Islam, they're Orientalists. We call them Orientalists. And these people really study Islam from an angle really to support their own objectives. So they go into Islamic history, they study Islamic history, they study the Arabic language, they study the Quran, they study the Hadith sciences. All of these things that they are studying, not because of objective study, but it's to study in order to undermine the Muslims, and to undermine their unity, and to undermine them from going back to the true religion. This is the angle that they come from. So the reason why they support the Mu'tazila is because the usul of the Mu'tazila have the same foundation that the Western civilization has its foundations. Because Western civilization is founded upon the Greek philosophy, upon the writings of Aristotle, the writings of Plato. Right? That's what Western civilization is actually founded upon. So when they saw that in Islam, when they see and look at Islamic history, they see that what happened in Islamic history is that foreign influences came into the Muslims, and those foreign influences actually came from the Greeks. Because Kalām, Ilmul Kalām, is actually from the Greeks. The speech about Allah, His names, His attributes, using the language of Aristotle, bodies and actions, all of that is from the Greek philosophers. So they have an affinity to the groups of Kalam. This is why when these people, these Orientalists and these philosophers and these professors, when they try to speak about Islam, they always raise the Ahlul Kalam. They put the Ahlul Kalam like this and they say, these were the people who are upon the truth in Islam. They want to promote the Ahlul Kalam. And as for the people of Hadith and the people of Athar and the Imams of the Salaf, that these were backward, these call to stagnation, these call to so on and so forth. And that's the reason why they take that approach. Why? Because they recognize the Mu'tazila are taking from the same spring and foundations. That's why they will support the Ash'aris. That's why they will support the Mu'tazila. That's why they will support all of these groups, because they see a connection between them. Also, you see that many of these professors who write, a lot of them are Christians. And Christian theology, as I said to you, that amongst the Christians there were already the Jahmiyyah, before Islam even came. Because amongst the Christians were those who are speaking about Allah's names and attributes, just like Jahm bin Safwan, and Ja'd bin Dirham, and the Mu'tazila, and the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. You will find books of these people 200-300 years before Islam. I'll give you a name. A name of a person called Augustine. Augustine of Hippo, a place called Hippo in the Middle East. This was a great scholar of the Christians. To us, in retrospect, he was nothing but a Jahmi Mu'tazili. Why? Because when you look at how he's speaking about Allah, Allah does not have a body, Allah does not have accidents, Allah is not subject to time, Allah does not have a location. Where have we read this before? We've read it in the books of the Ash'aris. We read it in the books of the Mu'tazila. Where did this come from? So the Christians likewise, because they've inherited the idea of speaking about Allah from the Greek philosophers, from the Jewish Christians affected by that, they have an idea of Allah and monotheism, right? So they promote the Mu'tazila for that very same reason. Why? Because it identifies with their idea, or their idea of belief in Allah. And then in turn, they will treat Ahlul Sunnah to be anthropomorphists. That's what you will find in their writings, in the journals, in the studies, in the universities. That's what they will teach. The Ahlul Sunnah are the Mushabbiha. And as for the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira, they are the true monotheists. And that's because those Christians who you find studying Islam, the Christians have already been poisoned by the idea of divinity from Aristotle. Allah is not a body, Allah is not in a direction, Allah is not in a place, Allah is not bound by time. All this comes from Aristotle. So for that reason, that's why they promote the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira, and they treat Ahlul Sunnah as being backward. And all of that is from the angle really is to prevent the Muslims from their religion. It's got nothing to do with advancement. It's got nothing to do with progression. Nothing to do with the scientific understanding. It's to undermine the Muslims, to cause confusion, and to perpetuate that falsehood.
Isn't it true that most of the Muslim scholars were Mu'tazilis, like Ibn Sina and these scientists? They were all from deviant sects.
Many of these people who are claimed to be Islamic scientists or Muslim scientists, the vast majority of them were upon ilhad. A lot of them were upon ilhad. Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd likewise was upon the way of the. They had aspects to them where they were affected by that kalam or by that falsafa, and so we have to be careful when we see a lot of these ignorant Muslims trying to impress upon the non-Muslims, saying that Islam and science and this and whatever and this and whatever and try to make it look as if we can make Islam look good, because there were Muslim scholars who were advanced in biology and this or whatever. This is like a defeatist type of mentality. In fact, it's the same thing. We are seeing the same thing in that time, like the Jahmi and the Mu'tazila. They felt that they need to argue with these people using their language and their philosophy. Why? Because it was supposed to be the science of the day. And if we don't agree with that, we are seen to be backward. The same thing that we are seeing now. These Muslims, they want to make Islam look good. And what are they doing? They're trying to follow the same standards that if you speak about science and nature and this, you are advanced and clever and intelligent. So if we can impress the same thing upon the non-Muslims, maybe they'll see Islam in the same light. This is batil. This is not the way of calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the way that Abdul Majid az-Zindani, this man, this Ikhwani from Yemen, that's what he's upon. This is what he's upon. It's the way of the Mu'tazila, the way of the Mubtadi'ah. This is not from our way. And this contains, again, it's a type of poison. It's a type of poison. This is not the way that the messengers called to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, this will be elaborated upon in tomorrow's lesson, inshallah ta'ala. Any other questions on the topic, inshallah?
A small question, inshallah. I see that it seems that there's a relationship between the Sha'ira and the Sufis.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand the reason, but it seems probably maybe you could shed some light on that.
Okay, the question was, is there a connection between the Asha'ira and the Sufis? And the answer to that is, when we look at the Asha'ira, we see that we have to distinguish between the early Ash'aris and the later Ash'aris who came afterwards. So I mean here that we distinguish between Al-Ash'ari himself and some of the early students, which are basically in the 4th century. Okay. The ones who came afterwards, in the 5th and the 6th century, like Al-Ghazali, Al-Razi, then they incorporated things into the Ash'ari madhab, right? That Ash'ari himself was not upon. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari was not upon tasawwuf. And he was not upon the philosophical mysticism that these people brought afterwards. But anyway, to help explain how that came about, in the 2nd century, around 100 Hijrah, we mentioned how Ilmul Kalām came, right? Ilmul Kalām came into the Ummah. So this now was speaking about Allah, His names, His attributes, using this language of Allah is not a body, Allah is not an attribute, Allah is not in a place, and all of this, and then trying to make ta'weel of the Book of Allah and whatever. At the same time, there was something else which occurred. This tasawwuf, this Sufism, initially when it began in, or its roots began in Basra, around the same time at the time of the Tabi'een. But when it initially began, it began as something where some of the people in that time, they had an excessive fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this excessive fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes they had an exceptional level of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some of them would faint when the Quran was recited, and some of them would, and so really this thing wasn't really found amongst the Sahaba. But it began as something like this, something small, as like an excessiveness or exaggeration, or it wasn't evil in and of itself necessarily, but it began by being something more and additional to what was found amongst the Sahaba. This is where its roots really began, and Ibn Taymiyyah mentions this in his works, that this is where it really began, this tasawwuf. From that point onwards, it began to grow and move into other things. And then as time went on, when we passed through the centuries, there was a merging. So Kalām, Ilmul Kalām now merged with tasawwuf. Right? So people who delve into Kalām, they would also, tasawwuf would be part and parcel of it. Likewise, they had this philosophical mysticism that would come in afterwards, by which the Batiniyah came along in the 4th century, and they brought their philosophical mysticism, basically, which means that there's a type of knowledge we can gain by spiritual exercise, which we can't get from revelation. This is like a philosophical mysticism. There's mystic knowledge, secret knowledge. We have exercises, mystic practices. Through that, we get knowledge that we can't get from revelation. Right? So that when that appeared in the Ummah, this also began, like people like Razi and Ghazali, they brought this element into it as well. So what we saw then by the 5th, 6th, 7th century, what they originally took from al-Ash'ari himself, they basically butchered it, doctored it, added to it, mixed things, merged it, and it became completely different to what al-Ash'ari himself was upon. Right? So this is why the Ash'ari school of thought, when we see Ash'arism, we see that they are Ahlul Kalām, in terms of how they speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are Mutasawwifa, like an excessive, exaggerated form of Sufism. They have mystical philosophy with them as well, and also Wahdatul Wujud, this belief in Allah's one, everything in the creation is just one. All of these things entered into them. And but Al-Ash'ari himself is free and innocent of that. He died whilst he was upon the way of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and so he's innocent and free from these people who ascribe themselves to Al-Ash'ari. They have no connection to Al-Ash'ari. It's just a name. It's a false ascription. These people are Jahmiyyah, Zanadiqa, and they are free from Al-Ash'ari. Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum. Who's what? Sorry, I didn't catch the... You mean Qadiriyya, Tijaniyya, you mean the Sufi orders? What the brother is referring to, from what I could catch from the question, is that these people who say that I'm from the Qadiriyya, I'm from the Tijaniyya, and he's referring to the Sufi tariqas, or the ways and the paths, the Sufi tariqas and the ways and the paths. And what this is referring to is that the same people we are speaking of, the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya, what happened is, in fact, this is what they say, that we are Ash'ari in Aqidah, we are say for example, Hanafi in fiqh or Maliki in fiqh, and we are, Tijaniya or Qadiriya in tariqah, right? So they have ilmul kalam, and then they have taqleed, and then they have an innovated form of tasawwuf. So when you hear these words that we are Naqshbandiya or Tijaniya or whatever, then this is another level of innovation that these people have, in which they claim that the only way you can achieve salvation and nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is through what they call these chains and these tariqas. Okay, you cannot achieve salvation unless you follow these tariqas and these ways. And these tariqas and these ways give you forms of worship and practices and mystical and spiritual cleansing. And you cannot approach Allah except by way of these tariqas. So this is what the brother is referring to. That when these people say, I'm Qadri, I'm Tijani, I'm Shadili, I'm so on and so forth, then he's referring to these people. Now historically, many of these people, they ascribe themselves to, some of them are innocent and free of these people like Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah, but many of them whom they ascribe to themselves were upon deviation. Like Ibn Arabi, for example, Ibn Arabi and the many others historically, At-Tilmisani. Many of these people were upon ilhad and zandaqa, these people were upon. And, so this is part and parcel of the mystical, the thing that we mentioned before, and tasawwuf and kalam. So alhamdulillah, in Islam, you achieve salvation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by what? By iman and taqwa. That's what we know in Islam. If you have iman and taqwa, then this is what brings you salvation. This is what brings you walaya to Allah. You are a wali of Allah if you have iman and taqwa. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. Those who believe and those who have taqwa. Any Muslim, any believer who brings iman, the iman, meaning the iman that the Sahaba were upon, Allah, His books, His angels, His messengers, last day, and all the affairs of belief related to that, His names, His attributes, and so on and so forth. You bring that iman upon what the Sahaba were upon, and you practice taqwa. Taqwa is to put a barrier between yourself and Allah's punishment by doing what He commanded and keeping away from what He prohibited. Simple. This is simple. Deen of Islam is simple. This is taqwa. Taqwa means to put between yourself and Allah, His punishment, a barrier. What is that barrier? Do what He commanded, keep away from what He prohibited. This is taqwa. So if you bring iman and you bring taqwa, you are a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single believer, he is a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no special, wali is someone who dresses in a certain way, or he wears a green turban, or he walks in a certain way, or he can't be approached directly. He needs the high people who will come and speak to him on your behalf because you're too lowly to speak to him. There's no such thing in Islam. If you have iman and taqwa, you are a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The difference in your walaya, your friendship with Allah, is based upon how much iman and how much taqwa you bring. The more iman you have, the more detailed that iman, the more taqwa you have, the greater wali of Allah you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the Sahaba are the greatest awliya of Allah in this ummah. And so then who is like them, he's like them, and so on and so forth. So in Islam there is no such thing as a tariqah or as some special walaya you have to give to a person. Rather, Allah has said in the Quran, as we said, that every believer is a wali of Allah. It is simple iman and taqwa. So this is what we have with Ahlul Sunnah. And anyone who wants to refer more on this, there is an excellent book by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. It is called The Criterion, Al-Furqan, Bayna Awliya al-Rahman wa Awliya al-Shaytan. The criterion between the allies and the friends of Ar-Rahman and the allies and friends of Ash-Shaytan. And in this book he clarifies the reality of these people who claim these tariqas and who claim to have access to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the so-called miracles and the so-called things that they bring, which are just from the shaitan and which shaitan aids them upon. So refer to that book. It is available in English, I believe. It is an excellent book which clarifies this topic, inshallah ta'ala. Any more questions on today's topic specifically?
What's the correct view about the idea that Allah is not limited by time, and that Allah Himself created time, He's not limited by it?
Okay, this is a good question. The statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not limited by time and Allah himself created time, what is the correct view regarding this statement? First of all, we should say that this idea, first of all, this phrase or this statement, we do not find it in the Quran, we do not find it in the Sunnah, we do not find it from the companions, we do not find any of the Imams of the Salaf mention the likes of this statement, that Allah is not confined by time. Rather, the origin of this kalam, the origin of this speech actually comes from Aristotle in his book Metaphysics. So the statement that Allah is not confined by space and nor confined by time is something that has its origin in the books of Aristotle. So as we said, when this ilmul kalam entered into the Muslims, and the Muslims began to speak about Allah, His names, His attributes, on the basis of that same language, they then began to speak about Allah in the same way. Which is why that when you go to Aristotle's book, it's called Metaphysics 12. Metaphysics 12. When you read that book and you see how this man is describing Allah, then you pick up the books of the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila, you will be astounded. You will be astounded. Because he's saying Allah is not confined by space, not by time. He's not an arad, he's not a jism, he's not this, he's not whatever. And then you see in the books of the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila, Allah is not a jism, not in a hayyiz, not in makan, not in a place, not in a direction, not in this, not confined by time. It's all the same thing. But as for where do we stand Islamically speaking, first of all we believe, as Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh explains in his Aqidatul Wasitiyah and other than that we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of time. Allah creates time. Allah is the creator of all time. And what do we mean by time? Now this is a question. Time is of two types. What we refer to as time is of two types. The first one is the time by the motion of the planets. The planets turn round, the sun, the moon. So this is time. Allah created that time. Right? Allah created that time. So the days, the years that we have, Allah clearly created the heavens and the earth. So this time is created. However, we see in the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth. He wrote down the decrees 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth. This proves that there is another measurement of time before the creation of the heavens and the earth. Right? That's very clear from the hadith. And likewise, okay, so we see that in the Sunnah, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that indeed Allah wrote the decrees, the maqadir, 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth. Okay, this proves now that there is a measurement of time. There's a measurement of time before the creation of this universe, of this creation. Okay. Why do these people say that Allah is not confined by time? What is the intent behind this statement? This will become clear to us when we look at the other statement, Allah is not confined by space. What do they mean by this? They mean to deny Allah is above the throne. So when they say Allah is not confined by space, what they mean, Allah is not above the seven heavens. In the same way, when they say Allah is not confined by time, what do they mean by this? They mean by this that Allah does not have actions which are tied to His will. This is the intent behind this statement. Allah is not confined by space. What you're trying to say to us really, Allah is not above the heaven. Why? Because according to Aristotle, if something is in a direction, it must be in a place. If something is in a place, it must be occupying that space. If it's occupying a space, it must be a body. Therefore it's created. This is the deen of Ahlul Kalām. So when they say Allah is not in space, that's what they really mean. Allah is not above the seven heavens. Likewise, when they say Allah is not confined by time, it's an ambiguous statement. What they really mean is Allah did not create the seven heavens and then make istiwa upon the arsh. That's what they mean. As in an event, they call it an event. An event cannot take place with Allah, meaning that Allah can't not do something and then do something that He didn't do before. Why? Because this is now being confined by time. That's what they really mean. So what we say is that when you say that Allah is not confined by time, it's an ambiguous statement. We say, first of all, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the creator of time. He created the heavens and the earth. And even whatever time existed before that, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, that the 50,000 years before He created the heavens and earth, that measurement is a measurement different to the heavens, of this heavens and earth. And Allah knows best, maybe it is on account of motions of bodies that were created before that. This is what Ibn Taymiyyah says in Dar at-Ta'arud, al-Aql wal-Naql. So that's one thing. The second thing we say on top of that is that Allah is one who acts as and when He pleases. He has actions as and when He pleases according to His will. So when Allah wills, He will speak. When Allah wills, He will act. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He spoke to Adam alayhi salam. Likewise, Allah spoke to Musa alayhi salam. Likewise, Allah spoke to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Likewise, Allah will speak on Yawm al-Qiyamah. All of these acts of Allah, or these statements of Allah, are different statements of Allah. They occur in succession, meaning they occur after each other. That does not mean that Allah is confined by time. Doesn't mean that Allah is confined by time. Because these are two separate things. That Allah is someone who can speak as and when He wills and act as and when He wills is completely separate to the issue of time. Right? It does not mean that because Allah acts and speaks, He must be confined by time. This is a false principle. This is why in the Sharia we see there are many narrations in which we see that Allah is speaking and acting, even though it is mentioned in relation to the time that we know of. Because Allah is one who can speak as and when He wills. If Allah speaks as and when He wills, that means He can speak to us. And from our point of view, we can see that Allah spoke to the angels at Fajr. He will speak to the angels at Asr. And likewise, all the other narrations that we see in the Sunnah, we treat them likewise. This does not mean that Allah is now confined by time and so on and so forth. This is false. What they really mean by that statement is to deny that Allah has actions and speech which is tied to His will. That's what they really intend by that statement. So we do not use that statement. We do not say it. It is ambiguous. It is intended to deny Allah's actions. So we don't use that statement. Yeah, that's what they mean. When they say that Allah is not a body, nor is He an accident, nor can He have accidents within Him. What they mean by this is Allah does not speak when He wills. That's why they said the Quran is created. This is why they said that the Quran is created. Because if Allah speaks, He spoke something He never spoke before. Now this is a change. Allah can't be subject to change. So the Quran can't be the speech of Allah because it signifies change. That's what they mean by accidents. Now, okay, inshallah, we conclude our lesson today then. So that we will continue tomorrow. We will build upon today's lesson. Today was just really a platform. Tomorrow is the actual real content of the lesson. Inshallah, we will deal with that tomorrow. وجزاكم الله خيرا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.